Maria and Alfred had long dreamed of the sound of a child's laughter in their home, but as if cursed by some malevolent force or simply by the cruel hand of fate, Maria could not give Alfred a child. And then, when she was well over 40, a miracle happened. Perhaps the heavens finally took pity on the childless couple, or perhaps the stars aligned in a favourable constellation. Maria gave birth to a healthy, beautiful son, and she herself remained unharmed. Now their modest home was filled with genuine happiness. Maria and Alfred could not get enough of their long-awaited son. Sometimes they would put the baby to bed and just sit there watching his peaceful sleep, until they were too overcome by slumber, leaning against each other as if afraid to be parted even for a moment. Seth grew into a smart and curious boy. He did well in school. Teachers praised his abilities and diligence. Maria and Alfred were sure that their Seth would undoubtedly succeed in life, as he had shown an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a drive to reach new heights since early childhood. They themselves were simple factory workers. Alfred toiled in a noisy workshop, and Maria worked in the factory canteen. But they dreamed that their son would become a boss. They, sparing no expense from their modest salaries, denied themselves even the necessities to ensure their beloved son was happy. After graduating from school, Seth enrolled in a technical university, and Maria and Alfred's hearts swelled with pride. "What a son we've raised," they would say, proudly telling neighbours and acquaintances about his achievements. They didn't visit him in the capital often, trusting him and believing in his conscientiousness and determination. And then, like a thunderclap from a clear sky, the ugly truth was revealed. Maria had to travel to the capital. The district doctor had referred her for an examination at the capital hospital. After seeing the doctor, the woman decided to surprise her son by visiting him unannounced. A half-dressed girl with dishevelled hair and sleepy eyes opened the door of the dormitory room. Both women gasped in surprise. Maria, recovering first, embarrassedly explained who she was looking for, but the girl said nothing, quickly threw on a flowery robe and, giving Maria a frightened look, rushed away, leaving the door wide open. Not knowing what to think, Maria hesitantly entered. The room was a mess. Maria, as if struck by thunder, froze at the doorway. Not just disorder, a dump, with piles of dirty clothes, empty chip bags, ashtrays, and a whole battery of various bottles, like silent witnesses to wild nights. On one of the beds, crumpling the greasy bedsheet, a half-naked girl slept soundly, her dishevelled, tangled hair spread out. Maria, as if in slow motion, turned her gaze to another bed and gasped. It was Seth, her pride, her hope. She would never have recognised him now. Drunk, dishevelled, with red streaks in his dull eyes and greasy tangled hair. Seeing his mother, he made an inarticulate sound and tried to sit up, but apparently his head was pounding with a hangover, and he helplessly fell back onto the dirty pillow. For the first time in many years, such rage, such all-consuming pain rose in Maria's heart that she couldn't contain herself. Her hand flew up and landed on her son's cheek, leaving a red mark. Another slap, and another. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with cries of despair. How could this be? They denied everything, saved every penny from their meagre salaries so that he could study, become a successful man, and here he was, drinking, sinking to the very bottom. "Mum, Mum," Seth mumbled, his tongue barely moving, giving off a nauseating smell of hangover. What are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? I came to see you, you parasite! Seth, aren't you ashamed? Your father and me, we're scraping by, saving every penny so you can study, and you're spending our money on this filth. Why aren't you in class? Why aren't you studying? Like we dreamed. We don't have class today. It's my buddy's birthday. We were celebrating," Seth muttered, trying to focus his gaze on his mother's tear-streaked face. Maria decisively kicked the sleepy girl out of the room, ordered Seth and his friend to get up, and sent them both to take a cold shower. Meanwhile, gritting her teeth, she furiously began cleaning the room, throwing empty bottles and dirty clothes into the trash. When the last bit of trash was collected, a short, middle-aged woman with a serious, disapproving expression and stern glasses entered the room. It was the dormitory superintendent. She looked Maria up and down before speaking. "So you're Seth's mother? Well, excellent. Today you'll be taking your son with you." "What do you mean, taking him with me?" Maria asked, confused, gripping the back of a chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. He's studying here." "Your son has seriously violated the rules," the superintendent snapped, her voice cold and indifferent. "Although, to be honest, that's putting it mildly. The order for his expulsion is already on my desk." "Expulsion?" Maria's legs gave way and she sank onto the nearest chair as if struck down. The world around her spun and her ears rang. He just hung out with some friends. Who doesn't do that? Why expel him right away?" "Ah, if only it were just hanging out," the superintendent sighed with feigned sympathy. "He should have been expelled long ago. You can't even imagine the relief I feel right now. Day after day in this room, drinking, mess, girls. But it ended up forever." Having said her piece, the superintendent left. At this moment, Seth entered the room silently, avoiding his mother's gaze. He knew. She already knew everything. Maria was crying, her face buried in her hands. How could this be? Their little boy, their pride and joy, their hope for a bright future, and now a disgraceful expulsion from the institute for drinking and complete academic failure. "Mum, why are you crying?" Seth finally said softly, his voice heavy with guilt. "I'll get reinstated, you'll see. Next year everything will be fine." What was there to say now? Maria sighed heavily, feeling a bitter sense of disappointment welling up inside her. "Let's go home, Seth," she said wearily. "We'll figure it out from there." They returned to their small town that evening by train. At home, Seth faced a difficult conversation with his father. Alfred was as dark as a thundercloud. His terse questions fell like hammer blows. Yet their son had certainly given them a fine gift in their old age. How could they face their neighbours now? Their Seth had turned out to be a good-for-nothing and a drunk. Maria sat in the kitchen, crying, staring blankly out the window. Seth, his head bowed, begged his parents for forgiveness, swearing to make things right and start a new life. "You don't want to study? Fine, that's your choice," Alfred said, trying to keep his voice steady, though bitterness crept in. "Then you'll go to the factory with us." "Dad, work for pennies?" Seth sneered, his voice tinged with contempt. "I've worked for pennies my whole life, as you put it," his father exploded, his eyes flashing with hurt. "You think you're better? Then get out of my penny's-worth house." Of course, deep down, Alfred would never have thrown his son out. It was a threat spoken in anger, out of despair, but it seemed to have an effect. Within a few days, Seth reluctantly and with poorly concealed resentment went to get a job at the factory. But he didn't work there for long. Soon he received his draft notice. Seth returned from the army a mature man, strong, but with a weariness and indifference in his eyes. Almost as soon as he returned, he announced to his parents that he no longer needed an education. "I'll get by as I am," he declared, meeting no objections in the resigned eyes of his ageing parents. Alfred and Maria, by then retired, didn't argue. It was his life, his choice. Soon Seth left for his first shift in the north. Work in the north kept him there, and for several years he lived as a shift worker, 6 months in the harsh northern lands, 1 month at home. He earned a decent living, even bringing modest gifts and money for his parents. Alfred and Maria sadly remembered their past dreams of a higher education for their son, but it seemed that, even without a diploma, his life had somehow fallen into place. Then one day Seth brought Claire home from the north. She worked there as a cook in the canteen. Their workplace romance had unexpectedly grown into something more. The young couple decided that they had had enough of the harsh northern life and got married. They moved in with Seth's parents to live together. In principle, Maria and Alfred didn't mind. Of course, their small 3-room apartment was cramped for 4 people, but they would manage. How their life together would unfold, only time would tell. Maria and Alfred welcomed Claire into their home as a daughter-in-law, surrounding her with warmth and care, which she perhaps lacked in her own life. Maria tried to please her young daughter-in-law, cooked her favourite dishes, advised her on how to manage the household, and shared the wisdom of her years. Alfred, though not very talkative and reserved, was always ready to help around the house. They genuinely hoped that in them Claire would find not only a roof over her head, but also loving, understanding parents. However, Claire only curled her lips in a displeased grimace. Life under the same roof with ageing parents seemed to her not at all blissful and happy. She wanted her own nest, where she would be the full mistress, where she could enjoy silence and peace, or, on the contrary, listen to her favourite music without fearing someone's displeased grumbling. But where to get this own living space? Upon returning to his hometown, he got a job at the local construction management, hoping for a stable income, but alas, they didn't pay millions there. Claire herself wasn't eager to work, finding all sorts of excuses to stay home longer, and then one day she casually dropped a phrase about how it would be nice for Seth's parents to move to a cheaper place to live, and give the remaining money to Seth and Claire for the initial mortgage payment. The parents didn't like that idea of leaving their cosy apartment, and then a real nightmare began in their previously peaceful home. Claire suddenly shed her mask of a loving daughter-in-law and began to behave rudely, could snap or even shout at Maria or Alfred. She turned on loud music early in the morning, when the elderly couple was still asleep, demonstratively didn't cook or clean, spending whole days shopping, mindlessly spending the money earned by Seth on expensive trinkets and useless trifles. And when Maria or Alfred tried to complain to their son about his rude wife, he just waved them off, irritably muttering, "What are you bothering her for? Can't you clean up after yourselves or cook? You've lived without Claire before. As for the music, why sleep until lunch? It's your own fault." And this lunch for the elderly began right after Seth left for work, around 7 in the morning. Conversations with Claire herself also led to nothing. She only haughtily raised her eyebrows, looking at Alfred and Maria with mocking disdain, as if they were a space not worthy of her attention. One day, Alfred, usually calm and balanced, couldn't take it any more. This happened in the morning when Claire, as usual, turned on the TV at full volume and went to the kitchen to enjoy a cup of aromatic coffee. "Pack your things and Seth's and get out of my apartment," he roared, bursting into the kitchen, his face red with anger. But Claire only sneered contemptuously, not tearing herself away from her coffee. "My husband allowed me to live here," she drawled lazily, taking another sip, "and you'd better measure your pressure, old man, or you'll get a stroke." "How dare you talk to me like that?" Alfred almost choked with indignation. He turned around and, breathing heavily, went to his room, where he told Maria with a trembling voice everything that had happened in the kitchen. "My patience has also burst," Maria said with bitterness, her usually kind eyes filled with tears. "Seth will come in the evening, we will confront them with the facts. Let him leave with his wife. But the conversation that evening never happened. After that scandal with Claire, Alfred felt very ill. Maria called an ambulance, but it was too late. Her beloved Alfred was gone. Stunned by the sudden grief, Maria seemed to have changed, forgetting about everything in the world. How would she live without her Alfred? How could this happen? He had always been so strong, never complained about his health. It was she who always ran to the doctors, thought she would be the first to go. But look how it turned out. Afterward, Maria spent days on end in her room, pressing a photo of her husband to her chest and crying silently. And Claire again turned on the deafening music and bustled about as if nothing had happened. Only Maria paid no attention to this at all. She had suddenly aged, become weak and feeble. Before this, she hadn't even felt her age, although she was already over 70, and now suddenly she had turned into a helpless old woman. Claire, on the contrary, felt like the full mistress of the orphaned apartment. And then came that terrible day when she simply threw Maria out onto the street. "No need for you to be under my feet," she threw out carelessly, not even looking her in the eye. Outside it was late autumn. A cold rain mixed with wet snow was falling, and the piercing wind chilled to the bone. Maria sat helplessly on a bench near the entrance, shivering from the cold and despair, waiting for her son. To argue with the shameless daughter-in-law, she had neither the strength nor the desire. She only hoped that Seth would come and put his wayward wife in her place. Passers-by looked at Maria with surprise and pity. What was she doing out in such terrible weather? Someone even dared to ask her about it. "Just getting some air," Maria replied with bitterness in her voice, ashamed to admit the humiliation she had to endure from her own daughter-in-law. Finally, at the end of the street, Seth's familiar figure appeared. Seeing his mother sitting alone by the entrance in the rain, he frowned. "Mum, what are you doing here?" he asked in a displeased tone. "Your wife threw me out. She scolded me and then just kicked me out of the apartment," Maria whispered barely audibly, her voice trembling from the cold and offence. "Yeah, Claire called, complained," Seth replied indifferently, as if the matter was trivial. "Said you broke her favourite mug." "Son, it was an accident. It just slipped out of my hands when I was washing it. There were so many dirty dishes in the sink," Maria explained, feeling a new wave of tears rising in her throat. "All right, let's go." Seth nodded briefly, not looking at his mother in the eye. Maria hopefully thought that now he would go into the apartment and finally put this ungrateful wife in her place. But instead, Seth silently kissed Claire on the cheek, and she happily chirped in response. Then they both went to the kitchen, from where the appetizing smell of freshly cooked food wafted. The old woman, feeling like an unwanted guest, silently followed them. When Claire saw her mother-in-law enter, she wrinkled her nose, as if smelling something unpleasant, but said nothing, only muttered something incomprehensible through her teeth. Reluctantly she served Maria a portion of food on a plate and coldly announced that from now on she would eat in her own room. "I don't like watching you eat," she declared dismissively, not looking up. "Your hands shake, crumbs fly everywhere, it's disgusting." Of course, Claire was deliberately exaggerating, emphasizing the clumsiness of her mother-in-law. Maria tried her best to eat neatly, but age took its toll, and sometimes small pieces of food fell on the table or the floor. The old woman didn't argue with the rude young woman. After all, eating alone in her room would be more peaceful, with no one glaring at her disdainfully. A month passed like this. Maria barely left her room, only when absolutely necessary, trying to avoid any encounters with Claire. She rarely saw her son, Seth spent all day at work, from morning till late evening, and when he returned home, he seemed to forget his mother existed, not even bothering to check on her for a few minutes. But one day he did come to see her. Maria's heart rejoiced at the prospect of a brief conversation with her son, but her joy was premature. Without preamble or ceremony, Seth brought up the topic of transferring the apartment into his name. After all, he reasoned, he was her only heir. "Son, but I'm still alive," his mother said bitterly, feeling as though cold fingers were squeezing her heart. "And no one's chasing you away," Seth replied indifferently, shrugging. "But if we take care of it now, then in the future—" He paused for a moment, as if tripping over his own tactlessness, but then continued, "In the future, I won't have to run around gathering a bunch of unnecessary documents." "So you're waiting for me to die?" Maria said with inexpressible pain in her voice, feeling a traitorous tear roll down her wrinkled cheek. "Mum!" Seth exclaimed in annoyance, as if she had said something inappropriate. He waved his hand and muttered something incomprehensible before leaving the room, leaving the old woman alone with her bitter thoughts. Maria cried all night, tossing and turning on the hard sofa, remembering her long life. How proud they were when their son was admitted to a prestigious university in the capital. What went wrong after that? Had independent life so irrevocably spoiled their boy? Or had she and Alfred missed something in his upbringing, made some fatal mistake, that their son had forgotten that a mother is sacred, that she must be cherished and respected? Claire's rudeness and disrespect had essentially sent Alfred to an early grave. Now it was Maria's turn? Yes, only now did it dawn on her that perhaps her Alfred would still be alive, if not for this unbearable situation in their home. Such sharp pain, such crushing loneliness and longing gripped her heart that she wanted only one thing, to be reunited with her Alfred as soon as possible. But how? And then a desperate decision formed in her mind, to leave this house, to go wherever her eyes led her, just to leave, and maybe up there the heavens would have mercy and take her to be with her beloved Alfred. Before dawn, when the city was still shrouded in silence and peace, the old woman quietly left the apartment. Her son and daughter-in-law were sleeping soundly, lulled by their nighttime pleasures. The snow-covered city slept under its white blanket. The elderly woman wandered the deserted streets, not knowing where she was going. She just wanted to leave into the unknown, into eternity. Her whole life had crumbled, shattered into tiny pieces. Her husband was gone. Her son had turned out to be heartless and ungrateful. Maria felt deadly tired. She wanted to lie down on the cold pavement and fall asleep, to forget everything in an eternal sleep. How she ended up near this old, half-ruined building she didn't remember. It was probably once a forgotten barracks that everyone had long forgotten about. There it stood, leaning to one side, like a sad reminder of someone's past life that had sunk into oblivion. Maria cautiously stepped inside, not knowing why. She just wanted to rest a little, to lie down. Inside the barracks, it was dim, smelling of dampness and decay. The old woman pushed open the first door she came across, and it creaked open, letting her into a small room. Yes, people had once lived here. They had probably tried to create some comfort to make it feel like home. Now all that remained of the past life were a shabby old sofa with sagging springs, a tilted table and a chipped wardrobe missing one door. Maria was surprised to notice that it wasn't as bad as she had expected. At least there was no layer of dust and cobwebs. Or maybe someone still lived here. The windows were intact, though dirty. She timidly called out to the inhabitants. Silence was the only response. The old woman entered the room, closed the creaky door behind her, sat down on the sagging sofa, leaned back against the stiff backrest, and before she knew it, she drifted off to sleep. She woke up to someone shaking her shoulder insistently. "Hey, who are you?" She heard a hoarse male voice through her fading drowsiness. Maria opened her eyes and started in fright. Towering over her was a huge old man in dirty tattered clothes with long tangled grey hair and a bushy grey beard. A homeless man. Maria, terrified, tried to think of what to do. She didn't have the strength to push him away and run away. "Forgive me, I must have dozed off," Maria murmured, feeling the flush of embarrassment spread across her wrinkled cheeks. "I can see that," the old man replied with a kind smile, studying her weary face. "But tell me, do you have nowhere else to rest?" I don't know," Maria admitted bitterly, her eyes downcast. "Is that so?" Tom drawled. "Well, it seems we're in the same boat, you and I. Don't be afraid, my dear. You're trembling like a leaf. I mean you no harm. Let me warm up some tea for us. You look like you're chilled to the bone." "Maria," the old woman replied softly, feeling an unexpected warmth from this strange yet seemingly harmless man. "And I am Tom, at least now," he said, with a smile. "Why do you say 'at least now'?" Maria asked curiously, her nerves beginning to settle. "Because, my dear, I remember nothing," Tom explained, spreading his hands. As he spoke, the old man deftly broke some kindling from a broken stool in the corner and tossed it into a small rusty stove that Maria hadn't noticed before. He placed a well-worn, soot-blackened kettle on the top. Rummaging through a bag, he produced a half-eaten stick of sausage, a heel of stale bread, a few bruised apples, a bunch of wilted greens, and several jars of cheap pâté and fish preserves. "The girls at the market give these to me sometimes," Tom explained, noticing Maria's questioning gaze. He brewed cheap tea bags in chipped mugs, not bothering to explain where he got them, and carefully sliced the bread and sausage. He rinsed the fruit with water from a large 5-litre plastic bottle. "Sit down, Maria, let's eat," Tom offered warmly. "Thank you, Tom, but I'm not hungry," Maria lied, her stomach betraying her with a growl. "Eat, eat," Tom encouraged, "or at least have some tea." Maria hesitantly took the offered mug and took a small sip. The cheap, strong tea unexpectedly warmed her from within, spreading a pleasant warmth through her body. Another sip and a faint glimmer of hope stirred in her heart, suggesting that perhaps not all was lost. "Do you live here all the time?" she asked Tom softly, looking around his humble dwelling with interest. "Yes, ever since the summer when I came to my senses," Tom confirmed, sighing as he recounted his strange tale. He remembered nothing before the day he woke up on the bank of an unfamiliar river, his head throbbing with pain. Who was he? Where did he come from? His mind was a blank slate, devoid of any memories from his past life. Then 2 peculiar men, Randall and Manuel, both homeless like himself, appeared on the riverbank. They had come to check someone else's fishing nets, but found Tom instead, beaten and unconscious. Taking pity on him, they carried him to this abandoned barrack, gave him some old clothes and laid him on a sagging sofa to rest. The next morning, Tom, who wasn't yet Tom, decided to go to the police, hoping they could help him remember his identity. But he wasn't even allowed inside the station. A young, arrogant officer cursed at him, calling him a drunk and a vagabond, and threatened to throw him in jail. Offended, Tom left, abandoning his quest for justice. He didn't tempt fate again, hoping instead that his memory would return on its own and he would find his way home. But it wasn't meant to be. For 2 days he wandered the city, but his memory didn't return, and the headache only slightly subsided. Then he encountered Randall and Manuel again, and they invited him to stay with them. They were the ones who named him Tom. A person, after all, needs a name. These kind-hearted vagrants also showed Tom how to survive here. So they lived in this squalid room of an abandoned barrack with no electricity or heating, but they managed. In September, Randall and Manuel decided to leave for the countryside. A farmer had offered them work in exchange for food and a small wage. Of course they agreed. The farmer didn't offer Tom a job because of his old age, so Randall and Manuel left, and Tom remained alone in the empty barrack. He was a bit anxious about how he would survive the winter with only the small stove for heat, but he had no other choice. Maria listened attentively to Tom's sad story, and after a moment's hesitation, shared her own troubles. "So your son and his wife kicked you out of your own home?" Tom asked, his kind face clouding over. "What a scoundrel! You should go to the police, Maria. Let them deal with him." "What would I tell them, Tom?" Maria asked helplessly, her head bowed. "And I'm ashamed to complain about my own son. It would mean admitting that I raised him wrong." "And how do you plan to live now, my dear?" Tom asked sympathetically. "I don't know, Tom." Tom sighed. "You know, I'm living here under who knows what circumstances, but I've learned one thing, Maria. No matter what, you want to live. And you must never, ever give up. It's a sin." Then Tom paused, thoughtfully scratching his unshaven cheek, and finally said, looking Maria straight in the eyes, "You know what, Maria? Stay here with me." "Oh, but it's not right, Tom," Maria murmured, embarrassed, feeling warmth rise to her cheeks. "What's not right about it?" Tom chuckled, his wrinkled face softening into a kind smile. "I'm too old to be shy or afraid, and I'm not some criminal, don't worry. My memory's shot, but I'm still in my right mind." "Well, you don't seem like one," Maria weakly smiled back, feeling the heavy stone of resentment shift slightly in her heart. "Thank you for the invitation, Tom." And with that, she couldn't hold back any longer. She sniffled and discreetly wiped away a tear that rolled down her cheek. She would never have imagined that in her old age she would end up homeless, and so began a new, far from easy chapter in her life. One day, unable to bear the crushing feeling of helplessness, Maria decided to return home, at least to retrieve her documents and bank card, where her modest pension was deposited. But her daughter-in-law didn't even let her in. Of course, she didn't return her passport or bank card, only contemptuously remarking that nothing of hers was there and never had been. And, as it turned out, they had changed the locks. Maria cried for a long time from the injustice and cruelty. Tom comforted her as best he could. Let it go, Maria. To hell with that pension. Let her choke on it, if she's so greedy. We've got some food, and I found you some warm clothes at the dump. We'll manage somehow." "But Tom, you understand, don't you, that living like this is not normal?" Maria sobbed, feeling despair rise in her throat again. "I agree, Maria, it's not normal, but what did I tell you? Go to the police." "I can't, Tom. I'm ashamed to complain about my own son. I raised him myself." "Well then, don't tear your heart out, my dear. We'll get by somehow." So they lived together in the abandoned barracks for about a month. Winter had fully set in, freezing the earth with its frosts. In December, bitter cold struck. The stove smoked and crackled from morning till night. Thankfully there was plenty of junk lying around to keep the fire going, but it was still cold. The heat escaped through the draughty walls and rotting floor like water through fingers. Then one day Tom fell seriously ill. He shivered with chills, coughed incessantly, and complained of chest pain. Maria kept giving him hot tea, but it did little good. It became clear that the old man needed medicine and proper medical treatment. But who would help a person without documents or insurance? Money was needed for medicine. They didn't even have a penny for the cheapest pills. One night, Maria accidentally touched Tom's forehead and cried out in alarm. The old man was burning up like their stove. She had to get those damned medicines urgently, and so, gathering the last of her courage, the elderly woman went to her son. It was a weekend, and the elderly woman rang the doorbell uncertainly. She heard slow footsteps approaching, and someone looked at her through the peephole. "What do you want?" Seth asked wearily and irritably through the closed door, not even bothering to open it. "Son, please let me in. I really need to talk to you." "Mum, I thought you understood. You left. That was your choice, so live with it."
"Seth, please give me my bank card. I desperately need money."
"Claire already told you there's no card of yours here. You probably lost it somewhere."
"Seth, that's not true."
Maria choked on a bitter lump in her throat, unable to hold back her tears.
"Son, how can you be so cruel? Your mother is basically living on the street, with no means to survive, and you don't care at all."
"That was your choice, Mum," Seth stubbornly repeated, his voice cold and indifferent.
"But it was you and your wife who made my life like this, so I was ready to run away anywhere."
Maria cried out in bitterness.
"All right, let's not talk about it. I need money for medicine. An excellent person is seriously ill, and I don't even have a penny for the cheapest fever reducer."
"Mum, don't talk nonsense," Seth said suspiciously. "What person? Have you started drinking or something? I didn't think you'd sink so low after Dad died." Maria, hearing these cruel and unjust words, recoiled from the door as if struck. Seth felt like a stranger, his voice cold and heartless. He clearly had no intention of listening to her or understanding her pain, and he obviously had no intention of opening the door. Humiliated and crushed like a beaten dog, the woman left the doorstep of her own home. She wandered through the snowy city toward the barrack, trying to figure out what to do next. Tom needed to be saved urgently, but how? And then, when she was already a few hundred meters from the abandoned dwelling, an ambulance with its lights flashing drove past her. Maria didn't even realize how she found the courage for this desperate act. She simply stepped forward, right into the path of the speeding vehicle. The brakes screeched, the ambulance came to an abrupt stop, and the enraged driver jumped out cursing, followed by a sleepy-looking doctor. "What the hell are you doing? Trying to kill yourself or something?" the driver shouted, his face red with anger.
"Please, I beg you, save a man,"
Maria rasped, feeling her last ounce of strength fading. "What man?" the ambulance driver grumbled, eyeing the peculiar old woman in dirty clothes.
"An ordinary man. He lives in the barrack,"
Maria struggled to say.
"Yes, he's a homeless man, but he's still a person."
At that moment, a paramedic glanced at Maria and ordered the driver, "Let's go to this barrack." "But why?" the driver protested. "Let them call another crew. Our shift is almost over." "Another ambulance might not come and we're already here," the paramedic snapped, showing unexpected firmness.
"And I don't have a phone," Maria mumbled, guiltily lowering her eyes.
Sighing, the paramedic helped her into the ambulance, and soon they arrived at the abandoned barrack. Tom lay on a sagging sofa, breathing heavily and rasping, his face flushed with fever. The paramedic quickly examined him and turned to the driver. "It looks like advanced bilateral pneumonia. We're taking him to the hospital. Does he have any ID?"
The paramedic looked at Maria questioningly. "He doesn't even remember his own name. Everyone calls him Tom," the old woman replied softly. "I see," the paramedic sighed. "Don't worry too much, Grandma. God willing, your old man will pull through." And so Tom was taken away. Maria didn't know what became of him. During the long winter evenings huddled by the stove, she often cried, feeling unwanted and forgotten. Tom was probably no longer among the living. But unexpectedly, a week or two later, a luxurious black car pulled up at the barrack. Maria, wrapped in layers of old clothes, was warming herself by the stove and didn't hear the soft knock at the door. It creaked open, and an elegant woman in an expensive mink coat, around 40 years old, stood on the threshold. Behind her loomed a sturdy, silent man. "Are you Maria?" the stranger asked politely, studying the old woman. "I am," Maria faltered. "And who are you?" "My name is Haley. I am the daughter of Howard Rogers." "Howard Rogers? I don't know who that is." Maria shrugged indifferently, trying to understand what was happening. "The man you knew as Tom, who lived here with you," Haley explained. "I don't understand," Maria murmured, her heart suddenly racing. Haley then told an astonishing story. When Tom was brought to the hospital, the doctors, noticing his memory issues, contacted the police to identify him. And that's when the incredible truth was revealed. This homeless man, who couldn't remember his name, was a prominent businessman from the capital, Howard Rogers. 6 months earlier, he had gone fishing with friends and suddenly disappeared. He was searched for extensively in the capital, to no avail. Meanwhile, he had been in an entirely different city the whole time. It was later discovered that his business partner had attempted to have him killed, but the attempt had failed. In the hospital, Howard gradually began to recall fragments of his past life, and when his daughter Haley rushed to his side from the capital, the first thing he asked her was to find and save the woman who had cared for him in his final days in the barrack, an unfortunate old woman named Maria. "So, my father asked me to take you with me. Please gather your things," Haley said with a warm smile. "Why?" Maria asked, unable to believe her luck. "You will live with us. We have a vacant guest house where you will be comfortable and at peace." 6 more months passed. Howard recovered, regained his health, and returned to his luxurious country home. He retired from business, handing over the reins to his daughter and her husband. Now he spent most of his time at home, tending to his garden and enjoying the tranquility. And he found love again. After his wife's death, he had been alone for a long time. But now Maria was by his side. Yes, in their old age, these two lonely souls decided to live together, supporting and warming each other. Their late spouses, perhaps, would not have condemned them for it. Then, unexpectedly, Seth appeared. It turned out he had seen his missing mother's story on social media and decided to reach out. He showed up at Howard Rogers's house and immediately accused Maria. "How could you betray father's memory like this?" "Betray?" Maria squinted, giving her son a cold look. "No, son, you are the traitor. But your father, he would have understood me." "Fine, that's your business," Seth sneered. "But I'm here for another reason. Claire and I want to sell your apartment and buy a bigger place. You should transfer it to me." "And why would I do that? You're already living like a king," Maria replied bitterly. "So I won't even consider it, son." And Seth left, empty-handed, blinded by his own greed. Only later did he realize how wise his mother's decision had been. Claire soon left him,
It turned out she had been cheating on him for a long time. If the apartment had belonged to Seth, she would have undoubtedly taken half of it. As it was, he at least had a place to return to. Seth came to his senses after all that had happened. He rushed to the capital, begged his mother for forgiveness, even knelt before her. And she forgave him. A mother's heart is like that, ready to forgive anything, even betrayal.